Hello, and welcome to this preview of Book 5 of Paradise Lost, which I call Dreams, Digestion, and the Origins of Rebellion. This, admittedly, is a chapter that in a survey class where you would read segments of Paradise Lost, you would either get summarized for you or maybe read a snippet of maybe Eve's dream or maybe some speeches by God the Father, but we don't do that. We're going to pay close attention to it, preview it, look at some passages that stand out, and then read the whole thing together. As always in class, I review the invocation for reasons I've already stated. And this outline for Book 5 is very involved. So what I would suggest doing, if you're my student or if you're just a person going through Paradise Lost, you could take pictures. You can have this sort of nearby as you have your book. What I encourage my students to do is to actually take the time and bracket these sections of the chapter and annotate in the margin. So as you're reading your actual book, you don't have screens nearby and you kind of know the roadmap of the chapter. This is a very involved, complicated chapter just in terms of following what's basically going on. So the chapter exists in a few separate sections. The first section centers on the dream Eve has. So the first 25 lines describe a morning in prelapsarian or pre-fallen Eden, and Adam wakes Eve up. Again, if you need to pause the video to annotate your book, I really recommend taking the time to do that. It'll make the reading experience a little more chill and relaxed and easy to do. Eve then tells Adam of her peculiar dream. We're going to be looking at these lines closely. Really, really worth paying attention to. In my opinion, not needed, frankly. It doesn't need it, this. That could be summarized quickly, but Milton tells this very specific story. Third, Adam, who sort of is to the 21st century ear kind of obnoxious here. Eve is vulnerable to him and shares some vulnerable moments, and he kind of mansplains how the mind works to Eve. So he comments on the distinctions between reason and then fancy, which is sort of a high-level imagination, and imagination. So he sort of offers like color commentary on her dreams, and that's those lines. And then they mutually sing a beautiful prayer to God's creation, which a lot of readers think like those moments both in heaven and in pre-fallen paradise are boring, but there's some really beautiful moments there too. So that's Eve's dream. The second part of this chapter is the visit from the angel Raphael, not the Ninja Turtle Raphael. That's a different epic. So again, you could see this is a lot, right? And I just, again, with new readers, I think it's fine mapping out basically what goes on in these chapters before reading, because for the most part, we know the major events of this poem already. And I think it's good just to feel not super confused. So 224, 245, God tells Raphael. So it sort of reminds me of book 1 of the Odyssey, where we're suddenly at Mount Olympus and the gods are talking. So God tells Raphael of Satan's plan, which he knows fully about because he's, like God. Immediately connected to Satan's plan to tempt mankind to sin and to betrayal of God's command, God makes sure that man is taught about his own freedom, and that Raphael gives Adam an education about sort of the origins of Satan and how Satan became Satan, and also connected to that, the danger that Adam and Eve are in. I think it's really important to talk about why do this. Why isn't God's command to Adam and Eve enough? And it seems like God is even aware that mankind needs more than just a directive. So that's interesting. 2, Raphael has this amazing journey to Eden that's sort of superhero-ish. There's another Galileo-related epic simile, which is cool for the science folks out there. 3, we get like the 1950s housewife version of Eve. She's asked to make a paradisal meal for Raphael and Adam, which she does. And we get sort of a long digression on the meal prep and the praising of Eve. Something I talk about, which is a really quirky detail only in Milton, we get angelic digestion. That's really, really interesting. It actually reminds me of in A Christmas Carol in Stave 1 where Scrooge asks Marley, can you sit? Yes, I can. He asks the ghosts, like, what kind of human things can you do? And here we get angels doing sort of human things. 5, Adam, who's very inquisitive. I spent time in undergrad and grad deep diving and researching Adam. He's not the most interesting character to me now, but at the time I just found it really interesting how inquisitive he was. He asked Raphael about just God's creation, both on heaven and earth. Raphael and Adam discuss the reality of man's free will and the necessity of being obedient to God. And this, to me, is one of the key tensions, not only in actual life, particularly if you're a person of faith of any kind, but definitely it's a key tension in the hearts and minds of the characters in the poem, both angelic characters, the sun, and mankind. The notion that God's creatures are free because they're created in His image, and God is free, but yet obedience to God is the greatest good, piety, right? That tension's really fascinating. 7, Raphael explains to Adam the creation of the sun. So this is sort of like chronologically the first moment. If you were making a chronological timeline of Paradise Lost, this I think is the first moment. God announces the creation of the sun. We'll talk about that. The story within the story is God tells the angels of this, and then that ends up tipping some of the angels into anger, including Lucifer. And then the final part of Book 5, and again, take your time, annotate your books. The final part of Book 5 is the backstory of Lucifer complaining to his fellow angels about this recent sudden promotion of the newly created Son of God. And God tells his newly created son about Lucifer's plans of rebellion, again, kind of ruining any sense of suspense. Lucifer, from his heavenly palace, speaks to his fellow rebellious angels about the nature of obedience from his perspective. And then Abdiel, unfallen angel, and Lucifer, the about-to-fall angel, debate the merits of obedience, and Satan objects to angels obeying the Son. He doesn't seem to object obeying God the Father. He's been doing that, for his entire existence in memory, but it's obeying this new creation that he has a problem with. Okay. That's a lot, I admit. So I want to talk about an obviously significant passage, and I want to talk about a subtle, maybe easy to miss passage, and then maybe like a moment that's interesting, and then some reflection questions. So the significant passage to me, and there's several I could choose from, is Eve's dream told to Adam. I think a lot of this chapter is about this poem's view on how characters teach other characters things. And Eve tells Adam this story. This is before the fall, and this is Eve's sort of first, an early memory. She says to Adam, O soul, in whom my thoughts find all repose, my glory, my perfection, glad I see thy face, and mourn return. For I, this night, such night till this I never passed, have dreamed, if dreamed not as I often want, of thee. So I usually dream of you, Adam, because you're so wonderful. Or I dream of works of day past. I dream of our gardening, or our plans for tomorrow, or tomorrow's next design. So that's what I usually dream of. But then Eve says, what I dreamed of was offense and trouble, which my mind knew never till this irksome night. So I never had conflicting, difficult thoughts until last night. And then here's the dream. She says, methought close at mine ear one called me forth to walk with gentle voice. I thought it thine. Here's a little interesting moment. Eve, in her dream, hears a voice, thinks it's Adam's voice, and it's actually Satan's. That's interesting for many reasons. I think practically speaking, she's never heard another voice. So if she hears a voice, she probably thinks it's Adam's. But I do think the potential conflation of Adam and Satan here is interesting. And I italicize. This is my my italics. I italicize Satan's words to Eve here. He says, "Why sleepest thou, Eve? Now is the pleasant time, the cool, the silent, save where silence yields to the night warbling bird that now awake tunes sweetest his love-labored song. Now reigns full-orbed the moon, and with more pleasing light, shadowy, sets off the face of things. In vain, if none regard, heaven wakes with all his eyes, whom to behold but thee, nature's desire, in whose sight all things joy, with ravishment attracted by thy beauty still to gaze." So he flatters her a lot. Okay. And then she says to Adam, "I rose as at thy call, but found thee not. I rose like you were calling me, but you weren't there. To find thee, I directed then my walk. So then I got up and went to look for you, Adam. And on my walk, methought, alone I passed through ways that brought me, all of a sudden, to the tree of interdicted knowledge." This is the forbidden tree. And right away, she looks at the forbidden tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and says, "Fair, it seemed." The word fair, both in Shakespeare and Milton, is charged with meaning. It has a physical quality, but it also has a moral quality. And the moral quality is it's good. Fair, it seemed, this fruit. Much fairer to my fancy than by day. So usually by day I know the command is to not eat it, but in my dream it seemed beautiful. And she goes on, "And as I wandered, looked, beside it stood one shaped and winged like one of those from heaven by us oft seen." So they're in the habit of seeing angels, and she sees an angel in her dream. "His dewy locks distilled ambrosia. On that tree he also gazed." So Satan is there, looking at the tree, and he calls the plant, the forbidden tree, fair. So you wonder, when she says fair it seemed, is she echoing Satan's words? It's almost like he's already in her head. Satan, in the dream, says to Eve, "And oh, fair plant," said he, "with fruit surcharged, deigns none to ease thy load and taste thy sweet, nor God nor man." And here's the big question. Satan asked her, "Is knowledge so despised? Or envy? Or what reserve forbids to taste? Why can't you eat it?" He goes on, "Forbid who will, none shall from me withhold longer thy offered good." He's talking to a tree. I always tell my students, now we send you to the guidance department if you're talking to trees. But if you're Satan in an epic poem, you're good. He asked the tree, "Why else were you set here? Why would you plant a fruit tree and have the purpose of it to not be eaten?" It's a logical question. So Eve goes on. "This said, he paused not, but with venturous arm he plucked, he tasted." Make sure you circle "he plucked, he tasted," because that's going to be echoed later on in book 9. "Me, damp horror, chilled," Eve said. At such bold words vouched with a deed so bold, but he, the voice, the angel, thus overjoyed. I just want to point out, if you paint this as a dramatic scene, Satan, as the angel, has stopped looking at her. He's addressing the tree. "O fruit divine, sweet of thyself, but much more sweet, thus cropped, forbidden here, it seems, as only fit for gods, yet able to make gods of men. And why not gods of men? Since good, the more communicated, more abundant grows, the author not impaired, but honored more." There's an argument here. Satan's argument is that the more men strive to be like gods, the more honored God himself is. Now, we can discuss that, but notice that the mere flattery early on didn't really do anything to Eve. So now he's creating a little argument. Satan goes on, "Hear, happy creature." So he turns his attention to Eve. "Hear, happy creature, fair angelic Eve." Again, planting, he calls the fruit fair, and he says that the fruit will make you like a god or like an angel. So he calls Eve fair angelic. This is almost like linguistic hypnosis, right? He's putting all the words next to the name Eve that are going to remind her of how amazing it's going to be when she eats the fruit. "Hear, happy creature, fair angelic Eve, partake thou also. Happy though thou art, happier thou mayest be, worthier canst not be. Taste this, and be henceforth among the gods thyself a goddess, not to earth confined, but sometimes in the air, as we sometimes ascend to heaven by merit thine, and see what life the gods live there, and such live thou." That's his big argument. You can be like the gods. You can travel in time and space if you eat this fruit. And then she goes on explaining to Adam, "So saying, he drew nigh, and to me held, even to my mouth, of that same fruit, held part which he had plucked. The pleasant savory smell so quickened appetite that I, methought, could not but taste. Forthwith up to the clouds with him I flew, and underneath beheld the earth outstretched, immense." So she's in the sky, flying with Satan, looking at the earth. This is all in her dream. "A prospect wide and various, wondering at my flight, and changed to this high exaltation. Suddenly my guide was gone, and I, methought, sunk down and fell asleep. But oh, how glad I waked to find this but a dream." So that's a lot of information, right? That's a lot of information. And there's some really interesting questions to be asked connected to this. What stands out to you about this story? Is it the fact that Eve chooses to share it all with Adam in a completely transparent way? That says a lot of interesting things. Is it Eve's not complete shutting down of this voice's temptation? Because, I mean, she technically should just say, "God said don't eat the fruit, I can't eat the fruit." But there's a lot more complicated things going on here. Anyway, what is this doing here? I don't think we need this dream to be here, or it could be, very much compressed. So I have a few things it could be doing. One, it's not a soliloquy, but this is Eve not being simply a paradisal or Edenic, 1950s housewife making a casserole for Raphael and Adam. We also get in book 5 what Eve's thinking feels and sounds like. She wrestles with difficult thoughts and doesn't shut down possibilities, even commands from God. And, she's a really interesting thinker. We also get the fact that her knowledge is limited. She's not going to get Raphael's and later Michael's angelic education that Adam gets. So she has to deduce just from the reality around her what's true and what's best. Third, here we can't forget she's teaching Adam. And the way she teaches isn't like by philosophizing and saying, or by with philosophy or theology. She teaches with stories. This story is part of my experience in my dream, and I'm sharing it with you, and it's important, for these reasons. We're going to see Adam is a very different kind of teacher, and the angels are very different kind of teachers. I think a key trick, I love this, besides being like, God, you can make apple crisp, apple pie, apple fritters, dumplings, and some great apple cider. So I do think in book 9, we get what we know is going to happen. Satan tempting Eve with the apple and Eve eating it. Sorry, spoiler alert. You've had several thousand years to read Genesis. But I think it's interesting that Milton gives us, no pun intended, a taste of what that temptation might feel like. We have an appeal to vanity. You're so beautiful, Eve. We have an argument. It's sort of what we're going to get in book 9, writ small. And, it's a really interesting precursor to what we're going to get. And I think connected to that is that she's clearly at least partially persuaded. Um, there's a sense that she's at least open um, to the notion of other lives other than the one she's living. She hasn't fallen yet. She's still perfectly good. Um, but clearly, this is staying with her. She remembers the dream visit. She remembers the dream in a really clear way. She feels compelled to tell her companion about it. It's in her head. Okay, here's a subtle, easy to miss passage. Um, and this is where I teach at a Catholic school, and I think even at a secular school, people have sort of cultural, a cultural understanding of what Western culture is thought of as God and Jesus, and I think mostly it's Trinitarian, that God the Son and God the Holy Spirit are co-eternal, that they've all existed since the beginning of time. Milton isn't one of those, and I think we have to sort of be obedient to the text he gives us and suspend any theological beliefs or obligations we have. And if you read enough Miltonic criticism, there's a lot of critics who can't do that. They let their theology dictate how they read the work of literature, and I don't think that's good reading, actually. Um, so God announces the creation of the Son. This is part of Raphael's. God tells Raphael, please go tell Adam about the danger he's in. And you're going to give him a history lesson, including what tipped Lucifer towards disobedience. And this is within Raphael's story to Adam. Go to line 600 of your book. Within Raphael's history lesson to Adam, he tells this, the earliest chronological moment in Paradise Lost, God announcing that he's creating a son. Hear, all ye angels, progeny of light, and then we get the kinds of angels that we know from tradition. Thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers. Hear my decree, which unrevoked shall stand. It's so God, right? God says to the angels, this day I have begot whom I declare my only son. So the son is like a day old. And on this holy hill him have anointed, whom you now behold at my right hand. So that's talk about a Nepo baby, right? He's a day old and he's at the right hand of God. Your head I him appoint. Okay, you'll notice God doesn't feel obligated to present stories and arguments. He states facts and declarative sentences and commands. And by myself have sworn to him, I shall bow all knee. Sworn to him shall bow all knees in heaven. I think Isaiah and if I remember Ephesians have that notion of every knee shall bow. Milton's echoing scripture here. Shall confess him Lord. So it isn't just he's your boss. It's that you will bow to him, you will bend the knee. Under his great vice-regent reign abide united as one individual soul forever happy. Him who disobeys me, breaks union, and that day cast out from God and blessed vision falls. So this is the price of not obeying me, God. If you don't obey the Son and you're disobeying me, and here's what's going to happen: you fall in utter darkness, deep engulfed his place, ordained without redemption, without end. Without redemption's key. Lucifer heard God say, if you fight me on this, if you don't bend the knee towards my Son, who I created like 12 minutes ago, you will be unredeemable. Because we remember Satan debating in earlier soliloquies whether or not God's forgiveness could extend to him. Interesting. Maybe he wasn't listening. This is what tips Lucifer into rebellion. A weird detail. We know so far that angels can either sex assume or both. So they're gender fluid. They are in Milton. That's what it is. And here, during the meal, Raphael is with Adam in paradise, and the angel eats. We're going to learn that the angels can assume either gender, the angels can eat, the angels can poop, and the angels can have sex. Now, all of these things are slightly different than the human versions of them, But the fact that angels can do them in Paradise Lost is actually really interesting. So here we get the description of the meal between Raphael and Adam. Down they sat, and to their viands, to the meal they fell, nor seemingly the angel, nor in mist the common gloss of theologians, but with keen dispatch of real hunger. So Milton wants us to know that the angel, who has a body, unlike in traditional angelology, angels in Milton have bodies, and they have real hunger, not figurative hunger. They eat food. And concoctive heat to transubstantiate. Okay, I'm going to call a timeout. If you're a Catholic or know of Catholicism, you know that the significance of that word is that that's a word the Catholic Church uses to explain how the Eucharist is created, how you go from a piece of bread to the body of Christ. That the substance changes. It transubstantiates, and it comes from Aristotle's distinction between the substance of something and the accidents of something. The substance, the complete core reality of the thing changes. The accidental elements, the fact that it still looks and is shaped like a piece of bread is fine, but what it actually is in its core changes. He could have used lots of words here, and I don't know what he's up to using that inherently volatile Catholic term that he didn't believe, by the way. He didn't believe in the real presence. Because what he's talking about, listen to this. He's talking about angelic poop. Because he says, what redounds transpires through spirits with ease. What Milton just said is that angels are excessively regular. Food just goes through them. And he refers to angelic digestion and poop as transubstantiation. So what the Catholics refer to as the priest saying words to then create, in a way, God creating through the priest's words the body of Christ. Milton is explaining angelic digestion and incredibly insulting Catholics at the same time. Really interesting. Nor wonder if by fire of sooty coal the empiric alchemist can turn, or holds it possible to turn metals of drossiest or kind of corrupted ore to perfect gold as from the mine. Okay, keep going. Meanwhile, at table, Eve ministered naked, so they have a naked waitress, fine, and their flowing cups with pleasant liquors crowned. Okay, so they have this amazing meal. The angelic digestion is flawless and perfect. A little dig towards Catholics. He can be done now. But Raphael now riffs and says, "O innocence," the idea of innocence, he uses the literary technique of apostrophe. He's addressing a concept. "O innocence, deserving paradise. If ever then had the sons of God excuse to have been enamored at that sight. But in those hearts, love unlibidinous reigned, like a perfect, uncorrupted love. Nor jealousy was understood, the injured lover's hell." I think this is Milton here, right? Milton's just kind of hitting the pause button on his own story, is saying, like, right now is the perfect moment. It's really heartbreaking, actually. And I just want to point out, this is a time with students that I would ask, what was a time in your life that you wish you could go back to? Just for like 10 minutes. Maybe when a loved one was alive, or when a relationship was intact that no longer is. And I think this is the feeling here, like, oh, here's the perfect, wholesome moment, right? And this is before jealousy took over in the fall. And okay, so there's a lot. So here are some things to consider if you're keeping a journal, or if you're reading this for a class, or if you're reading this for a reading group. 1, Eve's dream is clearly an allusion to Ovid's tale of Narcissus. I didn't read the whole thing, but Eve sees her reflection in the pool, and actually, when she meets Adam for the first time, admits that she prefers her own reflection to the actual Adam. Which, if you're on a date and someone says that, like, I just went to the restroom and I checked myself in the mirror, and I actually prefer myself to you, like, that's a rough start, right? Milton could have had Eve simply have a dream in which Satan spoke to her, but if you just do a little poking around on the Narcissus myth, why do you think Milton includes that? What does it add, right? 2, some readers read key moments of Book 5 as evidence that Milton's Adam and Eve show signs of fallenness before their actual fall later in the poem. Do you think that's true? And either way, why do you think it matters? 3. How do Raphael, Adam, and Eve teach us, the readers, how this poem views education? They each teach very differently. I mean, you could almost make the case that the 3 different main kinds of teaching styles exist in Paradise Lost. Anyway, what do you think about that? 4, I was rereading a section of William Empson's study, Milton's God, who's a really hard character to like and to talk about. So I've been trying to think more deeply about him. And Empson writes this kind of interesting notion you could easily journal on. He says, "It's an intelligible view that God cannot work except for his own glory because he includes all value in himself. But this makes it hard to feel that both Eve and Satan deserved all their punishments because they too wanted glory. They had been taught in a hard school." I don't know, what do you think about that? I occasionally with my students like showing them what professional readers think about the books that we also are reading. You know, it's the nerd equivalent of like, I like baseball, I'll go to a Red Sox game, or I like basketball, I'll go to a Celtics game. Well, how do professionals read and think? And I think that's a handy thing to do. So if you're a teacher, I would always, every once in a while, not just when it's research paper season, but a way to kind of practice research writing is have a quote on the board, a critical quote, and have kids wrestle with it. 5, always reflect on a passage, choice, question, or problem that you have pertaining to Book 5. And I would just say use quotations in your response. I hope this was helpful, and good luck with your reading.